Ladies and gentlemen, the Knud Jansen lecture will be delivered shortly by Mr. Carson Harte, Chief Executive of the Cambodia Trust. ISPO was founded in 1970 as a non-governmental organization by Knud Jansen, an accomplished orthopedic surgeon in Denmark. The Knud Jansen lecture has been initiated by IPSO to honor its founder, and this lecture is traditionally an integral part of the opening ceremony of every IPSO World Congress. The 2013 Knud Jansen lecture will be delivered by Carson Harte, Chief Executive of the Cambodia Trust. The title of his talk is Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, a reflection on the development of the profession of prosthetics and orthotics using international standards. Before I invite Mr. Carson Harte to present his talk, may I request Dr. Jansen to introduce him.
Dear Carson, Carson Harte has been directly engaged in the implementation of ISPO standards in 5 Asian countries. He has been an ISPO inspector, consultant and advisor, touching on several P&O schools in other regions. As Chief Executive of the Cambodia Trust, he developed a strategic plan for P&O training in Southeast Asia, which led to the establishment of training schools in Sri Lanka in 2004, Indonesia in 2008, the Philippines in 2011, and Myanmar in 2013. Working in partnerships with schools in Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan, and encouraging regional developments through the Alliance of P&O Schools in Asia, the APOS, the Cambodia Trust is coordinating the largest group of P&O training providers in the world. Carson Harte has worked as a prosthetist and orthotist in the Rehabilitation Engineering Centre of Musgrove Park Hospital, Belfast, through the 1980s. In 1989, he helped form a P&O service delivery company in Belfast and a year later in Dublin, Ireland. Carson has been and remains a very active ISPO Education Committee member. He's now developing, with partner organizations, a sustainable model of service delivery suitable for the fast-growing economic powerhouse that is Asia. His Knud Jansen lecture will reflect his personal experience on the impact of P&O training schools across the globe and will offer personal insights into P&O education, appropriate technology, and service delivery in an international development context. Carson, I would like to give you the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, honoured guests, I am delighted to be chosen to deliver the 2013 Knud Jansen lecture, especially in India at this first ISPO World Congress to take place in a less resourced country. I have spent the majority of my career based in or working in low-income countries, and this is truly where my heart belongs. When I was asked to conduct the lecture, I was at first flattered. Who wouldn't be? Then I was slightly insulted, because I've always believed that the Knud Jansen lecture was conducted by old men at the end of their careers. However, looking in the mirror and with 37 years in prosthetics and orthotics, I suppose there is a case to be answered. All that having been said, I do hope for at least another 10 years of useful existence. And hence you will forgive me if my lecture dwells not just on the past, but takes a look forward and offers some thoughts on where we should be going as a society and prosthetics and orthotics as a profession. You will note, as I am sure many of our colleagues have already noted, that this honour has been the exclusive property of men, an issue which I suspect should change and probably must change. Okay, now I have endeared myself to the women in the audience and have made the men uncomfortable, I can begin. I intend to talk to you today taking an overview of ISPO, but mostly talking about the work of Cambodia Trust, my employer. I'm sure you'll be very relieved to hear that I will not be peppering my talk with Harvard references or the mathematics of biomechanics. I've forgotten all of that by now. I warn you now, this lecture is merely an overview, just a skim of the surface. There's just too much to talk about in 30 minutes. So please forgive me if I skim past or do scant justice to something that is close to your heart. It is good to be here in incredible India, the heart of the new India, the global India, the vibrant India. And it's hard to remember when you look around here surrounded by glass and chrome that India is still, to the greater part, an emerging economy. It's not hard to find links between India and the world of prosthetics and orthotics. And it is precisely because in the 1960s, as India was a less resourced country, that one of the early solutions to affordable and accessible prosthetic services began here. I refer, of course, to the Jaipur limb. Developed in the late 60s and promoted through the 70s right through to the present day, the work is known throughout the world, as is the message that the poor need a service that is affordable and is accessible. It's clear that at that time the Jaipur project shifted the paradigm, altered thinking, and I suspect that many of the low-income country services that are in place today were catalysed by that initiative from Jaipur. My title, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, it's a term that was first coined by Sir Isaac Newton in a letter to his great rival Robert Hooke, in which he talks of his work. If I have seen a little further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. And it is a comment about using the current body of knowledge as a start point for pushing things forward. He may well have stood on the shoulders of another chap called John of Salisbury in the 12th century, who probably said it first, but it's a little unclear if the translation was correct. In the context of this talk, I want to refer to the important work that has gone before. Documents that have collated and sorted former experience and have been peer-reviewed and have become the foundation of the work we at Cambodia Trust do. And in a simpler way, I guess the title of my talk is Don't Reinvent the Wheel. I grew up in Northern Ireland, as you probably hear from my accent, and in the 60s and 70s, I witnessed the impact of civil strife, terrorist incidents, car bombs, shootings, and I became acutely aware of the impact of conflict-related injuries. From high school, I escaped from Northern Ireland and spent 4 fantastic years in Scotland, studying and interning in prosthetics and orthotics at the National Centre for Education and Training in Prosthetics and Orthotics at the University of Strathclyde. There are a few other old greying fat guys from my class in the audience today. I returned home in 1981 as a newly qualified prosthetist with a Scottish wife and settled down uniquely for the UK to work as both a prosthetist and as an orthotist at Musgrave Park Hospital in Belfast. From there I met and worked with many victims of trauma, as well, of course, as the normal causes of disability. And as Jan said already, I eventually worked in both Dublin and in Belfast. Of course, my home country has changed. Our conflict has been resolved-ish. And now we spend our time practicing inclusive government, listening to the great Van Morrison, and enjoying the best golf course in the world, about 20 minutes drive from my house. But I can't afford to go there. Oh yes, and the little guy in red, he belongs to us as well. While at Musgrave Park Hospital, I became a member of ISPO, and through winning an international travelling fellowship, I became more and more aware of the international work in prosthetics and orthotics, and of course the bigger picture of development across the world. And of course, being a University of Strathclyde product, I was always aware of ISPO, and especially the UK National Member Society, through my contact and mentoring from Professor Hughes and Professor Jacobs. At the end of 1993, I joined Cambodia Trust and with my family moved to Cambodia with the exciting remit of establishing a school of prosthetics and orthotics to build local capacity, primarily to deal with the landmine amputees of that country. It was at that time when I sought advice from ISPO, I became acutely aware of the ISP guidelines on the training of prosthetists and orthotists, especially in low-income countries. I had been given the remit of getting a school up and running in just a few months, and to say that ISPO was alarmed by the timeline was an understatement. Despite the scepticism of our timeline, it was precisely because of ISPO that the project worked. Instead of reinventing the wheel, we were able to refer to the body of knowledge, the consensus already built, the experience already gained, and from that, a curriculum in a School of Prosthetics and Orthotics was born. In those first few weeks in Cambodia, I learned an important series of lessons, and those are the lessons that have sustained my career, sustained the work of Cambodia Trust, and has had an impact on how ISPO was thinking for the last 19 years. Cambodia at that time was emerging from the impact of the overspill of the Vietnam War, the genocidal Khmer Rouge regime in the middle and late 70s, and 15 years of international isolation and civil war. The country was in a weak, integrated situation and quite challenging to work in. Education standards were believed to be the lowest in the region because during the genocide, just 10 or 15 years before, all educated people had been targeted and most of the teachers had been wiped out. Infrastructure was poor, and of course, very famously, the country was infested with landmines. The country at that time was being run by the UN, but was just about to return to democracy. And it had attracted several international NGOs who were interested in prosthetics. Most had arrived motivated by the publicity surrounding the landmine-related amputees. Clearly, the focus was on amputation. 6 NGOs were working under the auspices of the Ministry of Social Affairs. Each had his own way of doing things. Each defended their philosophy, and each was aggressively niggling the other. The Americans, through the Vietnam Veterans of America Foundation, brought Jaipur technology. The French, Handicap International, were using a wood and leather technology. Cambodia Trust was recycling discarded parts from the National Health Service in the UK. A Chinese group were using a low-tech foam and aluminium system. But the International Committee of the Red Cross, working with American Red Cross, were promoting the much-vaunted polypropylene system. There was one other group, the American Quakers, American Friends Service Committee, and they were trying to promote training and trying to make peace. As a naive young man, I thought we would be entering an altruistic world of common purpose and self-denial. Instead, I found the opposite. I found sometimes ill-informed debate, poor collaboration, but the biggest shock of all was the incredible passion with which each defended his own philosophy. Sometimes this passion was inversely proportional to their professional expertise. In other words, occasionally, the less the person knew about prosthetics, the louder he was prone to shout. However, there was one point of agreement. Cambodians needed to be taught how to make and fit prostheses. The growing tribe of expensive, quarrelsome expats was just not sustainable, and this was a point where we made a breakthrough. In July 1993, a one-week education consensus conference was held in Phnom Penh to seek agreement on the way ahead for prosthetics in the country. It was at this meeting we presented the ISPO documentation, and that became so crucial. We managed to get agreement that teaching prosthetics on its own was a bad idea. ISPO's documentation gave compelling arguments that prosthetics and orthotics taught together on the same curriculum made good sense. We agreed that the training should not be short. It should be 3 years, and we should aim for something like what was described as Category 2. Again, because the ISPO documentation made a compelling argument that this level of training was a minimum standard and was a sustainable way ahead. We agreed that the NGOs should work together towards a national solution and a plan of action that effectively phased out the artisan-based practices and embraced the consensus thinking of the professionals at the table, that sockets should be fit to the same standards as the developed world. And we had agreement in 1993 that we would all work towards using the one technology, the polypropylene technology. And that, last but not least, we agreed that each NGO would become a stakeholder in the school and would help to manage and run it. However, so strong were the concerns at that meeting that the academic level for the programme was too high, particularly for Cambodia with its depleted education system, that a full ISPO curriculum was not quite developed. But a local compromise was found, and it was more important to have that compromise than to go for 100%. However, 3 years later, the partners agreed that since the students were performing so well, we should adjust the curriculum to embrace the full Category 2 standards. And after a first inspection consultation, which we failed, the ISPO recommendations were then fully implemented, and a year later, Category 2 recognition was given. What did we learn? First of all, working with non-government organisations is a very special management affair. They're passionate, they're engaged, they're committed, as am I. But frankly, we're all a little bit mad. Building consensus and getting engagement and collaboration was like shoveling steam, like herding cats. It is the most difficult management thing I've ever done or ever will do. However, that consensus and the resource sharing and the commonality of direction added up to something that was much more than the sum of the constituent parts. Finding that common purpose and that one point of agreement changed the picture. Education of prosthetists and orthotists based on guidelines was that entry point. Standards matter. The ISPO guidelines were the most important part of it, and education was the beginning. We had seen so many short courses, visiting experts, prosthetic orthotic tourists, expatriates, each doing it in a different way, but finding one curriculum and one way of doing it, we built a sustainable service. The technology we used, and often people go straight to the technology. The technology was important, but it wasn't that important. First and most important, I believe, was finding a common approach to the training of people. The software before the hardware. So how did these standards evolve? The standards I refer to are the guidelines for the training of personnel in developing countries for prosthetics and orthotic services. A joint publication with the World Health Organization and ISPO. First produced by ISPO as an internal guideline, very much based on the broad experience and the work of GTZ and the schools planted by Mr. Sepp Heim in Tanzania, Togo, Pakistan, Tunisia, China, Vietnam. But also in that in that document, schools in Canada, programs in the United States and the United Kingdom and Germany were also heavily cited. And it was a slightly modified standard was negotiated in Alexandria in Egypt in 1990 and endorsed for the first time by the World Health Organization. It was later revised in Glasgow in Scotland in 2004 and published with the WHO in 2005 and is available on the WHO website. It is now currently under review and may be expanded, and some very interesting negotiations have just started with the World Health Organization. For the first time, the ISPO documents laid out clear standards that define the training and education of prosthetists and orthotists, and for the first time, clinicians and technicians were differentiated. To summarise, Category 1 and Category 2 are clinicians who see patients. Category 3, bench technicians. Ironically, these standards have now become a mainstream, not just in developing countries, but the same inspection process is going on in the United States, in Canada, and in several EU countries. And it is an interesting exercise how it has went in one direction but come back. Expansion. In 1999, the Cambodian School of Prosthetics and Orthotics began to look internationally. It had almost created enough graduates to meet the needs of the Cambodian population, and it turned to the growing demand for prosthetists and orthotists across the region. We ended up with students from as far west as Iraq, from as far east as Papua New Guinea, and as far north as North Korea. 18 nationalities, all the world's religions were present, and like many educational institutions, foreign students enlivened by CSPO brought welcome income. And for that, our partnership with the International Committee for the Red Cross, ISPO and the Patrick Leahy War Victims Fund was a key player in bringing those resources to the table. It was also a real feather in the cap for our ministry in that the Cambodian school was the first Cambodian institution where foreigners came in to study full-time. The Cambodia Trust was then invited to discuss prosthetics and orthotics training in Sri Lanka and across the ASEAN region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And in 2001, we produced a hefty document, probably the PhD I will never do, and for professionals in the region. And apart from Cambodia, Vietnam and Lao PDR, no professional training was taking place. And from that, we developed our strategy. The strategy document was entirely based on the ISPO WHO guidelines and has been the core of our activities in the last 12 years. The core of the plan for each country is the establishment of an internationally and locally accredited course, initially using competent regional and international teachers. And when the school is fully established, formal training of local trainers and handover is the second part. Each initiative has a total of a 10-year time frame, with the management of with the agreement and with each government that the school is locally managed and funded within that timescale. So really, 2 5-year plans. We call it PIPE, Project In, Project Exit. We don't start without an exit strategy, so that our partners understand that from year 6, they assume 20% of the cost, increasing until the end of year 10 when it's handed over. Core to that is the Cambodian school, now fully localised and managed by my colleague, Ms. King-Sissery. You see on the left as a 17-year-old student, and nowadays as a competent young professional taking her place in international society. The staff has a strong core of teachers who have been upgraded from Category 2 to Category 1 in an innovative blended learning programme with La Trobe University in Australia. These Category 1 staff now provide all teaching in Cambodia, increasingly to a band of international students, and also as international teachers in the schools in which we partner. In 2004, we established in a custom-built building the Sri Lankan School of Prosthetics and Orthotics. It's located inside the Ministry of Health, inside a custom-designed building, and it's now on year 8 of 10 years and is on track for handover. The school is located at the Ragama Hospital just north of Colombo, and it is now 40% locally funded. The government is the main employer of graduates, but the NGO sector is a close second. The future director is here today as a graduate of La Trobe and CSPO. In 2007, working with the Ministry of Health in Indonesia, a school in Jakarta was established, which just gained ISPO Category 2 recognition last year. It's housed in a refurbished government building in the heart of a health ministry, Poltekkes, and is now moving forward with its training programmes, this time not partnered with Australia, but partnered with Tanzania. The programme is now approaching its midpoint. Not only are we working with the Ministry of Health in the education of prosthetists orthotists, but we're also promoting the profession. And last year, with input from ISPO, we held a 500-strong 2-day meeting to promote the case for prosthetics and orthotics. It's early days, but we see Indonesia, 250 million people, a fast-growing economy, and we see potential in public and private sectors. This year we graduated our first 2 classes, 27 new graduates, and to date 24 of them are in full-time employment. Indonesia is so big it could easily accommodate 6 schools if we follow the figures laid out in the guidelines. However, one step at a time. Last year we established a new faculty of prosthetics and orthotics in the College of Allied Rehabilitation at the University of the East, Ramon Magsaysay, in the Manila area of Philippines. For the first time, we've started Cat 3 training as a foundation for the bachelor's degree programme, which is a total of 5 years with a post-graduation internship. The final outcome should be a combined Category 1 and Category 3 school. We believe this is the first time a formal Cat 3 programme will have been fully developed in a less resourced country. And hence we are working very closely with ISPO to make sure we get it right. And that consultation is absolutely key. and a strong commitment now from Philippines Health Insurance to pay for some prosthetics in the Philippines. And also a new commitment from the Philippines Lottery Commission, who sponsor students' fees and in the future are planning to build and fund employment infrastructure. I would like to acknowledge our partner there, the very ebullient Dr. Penny Boondocks, who unfortunately could not be with us, but deserves the credit for moving the whole profession forward, even though she's a doctor. This time in the Philippines, we're working closely with Mahidol University in Bangkok as part of our strategy for creating new external Cat 1s and training of trainers. The programme in Bangkok has been established by the same donor as Cambodia Trust, and this time working with our consultant and technical advisor, well known to many of you, Dr. Eiji Tazawa from Japan. The school has been established first to meet the needs of Thailand, but also to provide upgraded academic education for Cat 2 staff across the region who have considerable now practical experience. All these initiatives regularly consult with ISPO, and ISPO regularly attend their international advisory boards. Obviously, this regional approach requires resources and commitment. Key to this has been the Nippon Foundation, with whom Cambodia Trust has worked for 20 years. Through the success of the P&O school in the region, and then having fully understood the growing demand for training places from around the region, the Nippon Foundation committed to do that research and develop that plan of action with Cambodia Trust in the early 2000s. The plan, based on known facts and the existing body of knowledge and the experience gained through our network of ISPO contacts and some mentorship from Sepp Heim and from Dan Blocka, that programme has now become part of the core of the activities of Cambodia Trust and has been running as our prime directive since 2004. Sorry, a little bit of Star Trek zipped in there. At this point, I must pay my respects to the Nippon Foundation and their colossal commitment to prosthetics and orthotics. Without them, we would be going nowhere. But from that relationship comes lessons for everyone, I think. First of all, planning matters. Strategy matters. They're boring, they're dry, they're not very sexy, but they matter. Basing your planning on the body of knowledge matters because it gives it strength. Working with internationally agreed standards matters because it gives it strength. Partnership matters because it unleashes resources, and people working together instead of against each other can create an energy that is hard to suppress. We believe in getting those things right, resources followed. And if you're in the audience and you're in a situation where you want to change things in service delivery of rehabilitation or prosthetics and orthotics, I think these lessons apply to all of us. Just 5 weeks ago, we launched, with the Nippon Foundation, a brand new initiative in Yangon in Myanmar, a new faculty of prosthetics and orthotics embedded in the University of Medical Technology in Yangon. During the planning stage, where I spent this last year almost living in Yangon, we asked the government 3 questions. Number 1, does Myanmar need a professionalised prosthetics and orthotics service? Number 2, does Myanmar see any reasons why it shouldn't move forward at an international standard? Number 3, does Myanmar wish to collaborate in training with its ASEAN neighbours and partners? To be honest with the Minister of Health and with the President, we got 3 yeses in 3 minutes. Job done. Not really, a million pieces of bureaucracy to do, but the foundations were laid on those 3 questions. Why do standards matter to government officials? And I hope the government officials in the room are not insulted to this, but it's generally because our profession is so small, there is little expertise either within the Ministry of Social Welfare or Ministry of Health. We are not well known. Ministry officials can be quite risk averse. So when a problem is brought to their mind, that problem comes with a set of standards agreed and stamped off by World Health Organization. There's a plan of action. There's an external monitoring process. The risk is very low. And Mr. Civil Service likes to have a low-risk environment. We've also looked at other standards, like the cross-fertilisation from ISO, and we brought Cambodia Trust through this process whereby we were able to document and work out a process of continuous improvement straight from industry. And with that came the basis of our transferability, being able to put our curriculum, our lessons, the way we manage things on a pen drive and move it from country to country became very, very worthwhile. And back to standards. Standards have continued to work within ISPO. In 1995, a consensus conference in Phnom Penh set out standards for prosthetics. Functional, cosmetically acceptable, affordable and accessible, biomechanically sound, and using trained staff was the outcome of that meeting. And you know what? 15 years later, we hear exactly the same language in the UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disability. I'm not saying there was a direct connection, but that wording is now there. There are many other consensus. We heard at the open board meeting on Saturday exciting stuff that's going on around the wheelchair documentation that has been produced by WHO with ISPO. A copy of here, you will see, is already produced in Chinese. WHO is a key strategic partner with ISPO, and its endorsement of the expert view strengthens what we do. We are now looking at new guidelines and strengthening the guidelines and moving it forward. We have the wheelchairs, P&O training, rehabilitation services, CBR, and the recently published World Report on disability. Much of this work is funded by USAID and the Patrick Leahy War Victims Fund, and much of it is driven forward by someone well known in this country, Mr. Chapal Kasanibas, working in the disability and rehab sector. And for that son of India, we are very grateful. Funding can go and can go wrong. In the 1990s, as we worked up to the campaign to ban landmines, funding through celebrity and so forth became very easy to get. However, it began to go a little bit wrong, because after the treaty was signed, victim assistance, which was part of the treaty, became complex, difficult to explain. Community development came in, rehabilitation of amputees, the support to the economics around mine-affected communities, etc. It became more and more difficult to understand. The other two elements of the treaty, which were mine risk education and clearance, were easier to understand and consequently received better funding. The Millennium Development Goals were frankly a disaster. In terms of disability, not mentioned. It became a checklist of projects that could be funded internationally. And I believe quite firmly that the Millennium Development Goals harmed the cause of physical rehabilitation. Meanwhile, back in Cambodia, after having to argue to get orthotics in the course, we now find ourselves in a situation for every one prosthesis delivered in the country, there are 2, possibly 3 orthoses. Polio turned out to be a bigger problem. Peripheral vascular disease, stroke, cerebral palsy. Those are the things that we see in our clinics more than landmine victims. And this just underlines a point. Even after 20 years in Cambodia, we still don't know how many people need our services. Finding statistics, getting real statistics, getting down to the nub of it, is not easy to do. It requires resources, and it's not easy to fund. The UN Convention for the Rights of People with Disability is a whole new opportunity. It addresses prosthetics and orthotics under the umbrella of assistive devices. It asks that services are accessible. It asks that services, demands that services are of high quality. It demands that services are delivered by trained experts. It demands international collaboration, and it demands research. I think we need to back it up. The ISPO standards go some way to addressing the issue, but they're not mandatory. The inspection of schools is not mandatory. I believe quite firmly that ISPO is not a policeman and should not be seen as so. ISPO is a partner that can work with a school that is not accredited, that is not recognised, I should say, and can become a useful lever for resources. and can become a way of instilling confidence with your donors, with your supporters, with your host government, with your university. Agendas are shifting. Social model is on the rise. Medical model is less fashionable. We are overcoming barriers now. We're not doing things to patients. We're working with clients. And we have one huge resource that we are not yet tapping into: our clients. And through the rise of the disabled persons organisations around the world, we've seen a whole new energy that's gone right to the top of the United Nations, a whole new energy that has changed the policy of the Australian government towards overseas aid, and just last week, the British government. And we need to be there, tapping into this and forming those relationships. We need better designed research. We need to know what size the marketplace is. We need better technology. We need more trained people. The need is not anywhere near met in Southeast Asia. We think we could need somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 professionals. We need more schools using standards so that the standards are strengthened by the users. We need to encourage the expert user. We need to educate the resource holders. We need to work closely with governments. We need to work closely with international development agencies. We need to bring the international development agencies who are already well educated in what we do and help them to help us to educate others. We need better marketing. What we do is important. What we do makes a difference. But outside this room, it's barely understood. The Paralympics changed things, a great effect, but it was held in London. And when you look down the medal table, very, very, very few low-income countries were able to take part effectively. It's a bit like running a Tata against a Ferrari. The technology, the expensive technology, is not there. And we can tap into this energy in low-income countries. So where are we going in Southeast Asia? With 6 schools, we're pushing out 15 students per year. Where will they all work, is the question we ask. And it's a question which now we are turning our mind to. The business of prosthetics and orthotics is changing rapidly. Southeast Asia has the highest number of millionaires in the world, fastest growing economy in the world. And in the late 90s, it shifted away, most countries shifted away from centralised national economies to diverse economies, to market-based economies. We need to be in a position to get prosthetics and orthotics involved in that. When we look at technology, we have wonderful ICRC-inspired technology, which has been a true blessing, which has allowed us to fit and make cheap but great quality devices. But at the other end of the market, microprocessor controlled, energy recovery, carbon fibre and titanium is a million miles away from the reality of low-income countries. But now, as market economies grow, as Southeast Asia grows, the question I ask the manufacturers in this room and the professionals in this room, is there a middle ground? Is there a missing gap? But don't look at it as a gap in technology. Look at it as an opening in the market. Change of language. Education standards, technology differentiated, research focused by professionals on real issues. Development, seeking partnerships with business. I think that's the future. ISPO must be more proactive in that. Changing our image, being much more in touch with the press, with the media, much more savvy on Facebook and social media. Looking for new markets that are private, NGO and state, blended approaches. Engaging with the power brokers, the UN, WHO, businesses, World Bank, and especially disabled persons organisations. In closing, this strategic stuff is all hot air, unless we remain grounded. Let us not forget what ISPO and the profession of prosthetics orthotics is actually all about. It's easy to forget that. And at the end of the day, what we do matters a huge amount to our users. Not just for the hour or two when they come into our clinics for services, but day in from morning till night. If we do our job well, we'll barely be noticed. We'll have changed the life, perhaps thousands of lives in our careers. I count myself very blessed to having been involved in the rollout of my profession across the whole region, and in a small way perhaps contributing to changing the lives of tens of thousands or possibly millions of people. And I would like to thank the staff I work with, many of them over here, who are just so dedicated to the work they do. They're inspired by their challenge and work hard to do their best. Thank you. They also make me look very good. I'd also like to say thanks to ISPO for their partnership, in particular past presidents Sepp Heim, more recent past president Dan Blocker. Engagement was a word that Sepp taught me. Support is a word that Dan shows me. It's all unpaid, it's all voluntary. They give up stacks of time to mentor and support our organisations. For their engagement and support, I would just say formally, thank you very much. And maybe now, yes. So I've just been voted onto the board. Maybe it's a chance for me to give something back. Let me leave you in the hands of a young man called Matushin. He's 2 years old, and you know what? He's a much better speaker than me. So with that, I shall hand you over to Matushin.
Thank you, Mr. Carson Harte. May I now request Dr. Jansen to present the Knud Jansen Medal and Certificate to Mr. Carson Harte.
Well, thank you, Carson. When I asked you several months ago, you said, why me? I'm not with retirement. And why me? What did I do? well, after seeing and hearing you during this lecture, I think you really deserve the Knud Jansen lecture, which I'd like to present you now.
And now may I request our chief guest, Honorable Minister, to kindly give a bouquet to Mr. Carson Harte.